My golden child brother showed up at my house with his 3 kids and their bags, then told them Auntie doesn't love you when I refused to raise them while he sorted things out. 2 weeks later, CPS called because he'd abandoned them at a friend's house for 3 days. Now he's spreading lies that I've been neglecting my kids and created fake missing children posters with my address on them. My golden child brother accused me of abandoning his kids because I refused to raise them while he sorted things out. Now he's screwed. I am the responsible sibling, the one who's always had to be the backup plan for my golden child brother, Tyler. My entire life has revolved around picking up the messes he leaves behind, while our parents fawn over him like he walks on water. Tyler's the charming one, the risk taker, the one who dreams big. That's how they explained it when he dropped out of college, moved across the country with some girl he barely knew, then showed up back home 6 months later, broke and jobless. Every time he crashed and burned, my parents had some excuse. Meanwhile, I graduated, got a steady job, bought a modest house, and raised my 2 kids on my own after a messy divorce, with zero help from them. So here's where the story gets enraging. Last month, Tyler called me in a panic. His girlfriend, now ex, was leaving him. Not surprising, considering he had cheated on her, again, and she was taking a job overseas. But here's the twist. She was leaving their 3 kids behind with him. He was frantic. "I can't do this alone," he said. "You're the only one I trust." I asked the obvious question, "Why not mom and dad?" He paused, then said, "Well, they're getting older. You know how mom gets overwhelmed, and dad's got that back thing." "Right, but I work full-time. I have 2 kids of my own, one about to start high school, and I didn't sign up to raise his kids because he can't keep his pants zipped. Still, I said I'd help, as in, babysit sometimes or take them for weekends if needed, but that wasn't what he meant. He wanted me to take custody, full-on guardianship, while he sorted things out, whatever that meant. I said no, politely at first, then more firmly when he kept pushing. That's when the guilt parade began. Tyler cried, said I was heartless, said his kids needed family, and that I was all they had. No, they have him. Then came the phone calls from our parents. "Sweetheart, this would be temporary. Think of the kids. Your brother's just going through a rough patch." Rough patch? He hasn't held a job longer than 6 months in the last decade. He's missed birthdays, pawned family heirlooms, and lied his way through every family gathering with a new excuse for why he's starting over. I told my mom, "You made him this way. You've babied him his whole life, and now you want me to fix it?" She hung up on me. Then, the coup de grace, last Sunday. I came home from the store and saw my brother's car in my driveway. I walked in, and there they were, his 3 kids, sitting on my couch with their backpacks, lunch boxes, and a single garbage bag of clothes each. Tyler stood up and said, "I knew you'd come around. I'll call in a few days once I'm settled." I looked at him and said, "You need to leave. Take your kids. Now." He went ballistic, said I was abandoning his children, that I was bitter, that I always hated him because he was better liked. Then he did the worst thing imaginable. He turned to his 9-year-old son and said, "Guess Auntie doesn't love you enough to help your daddy." I saw red. I got down on my knees and told the kids this wasn't their fault, that I loved them, but they had to go with their father. Then I looked at Tyler and said, "You will not weaponize your children against me. Get out." He stormed out, dragging the kids behind him, muttering how I'd ruined his last shot. I haven't heard from him since, but my parents are furious. I'm being painted as the villain, the cold-hearted sister who let 3 innocent kids down. Even extended family is messaging me, calling me selfish, saying, "Family takes care of family." A few weeks passed. I blocked Tyler. I stopped answering my parents' guilt-tripping calls. I focused on my family, my job, and the peace that followed after years of being dragged into someone else's chaos. Then something happened that made it all worth it. I got a call from CPS. They said Tyler listed me as an emergency contact, and they were conducting a welfare check. Apparently, he'd left the kids at a friend's house for 3 days. No clothes, no food, nothing. The friend called the authorities. They asked if I could take the children temporarily. I paused. Then I said, "Not until you investigate him." I needed them to understand the full picture of what they were dealing with. The CPS worker on the other end of the line went quiet for a moment, then asked me to elaborate on my concerns. I took a deep breath and started explaining Tyler's history, the job losses, the broken promises, the way he'd manipulated our parents for years, how he'd tried to dump his children on me without warning. The worker typed rapidly on her end as I spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates and specific incidents. When I finished, she thanked me for the information and said they would conduct a thorough investigation. She mentioned that the children were currently in emergency foster care and seemed to be doing okay under the circumstances. My heart ached for them, but I knew enabling Tyler would only make things worse in the long run. The next morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Tyler, calling from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. His voice was different, cold and calculated instead of his usual charming tone. He accused me of ruining his life, said I'd called CPS myself, that I'd planned this whole thing to steal his kids. I tried to explain that his friend had called, not me, but he wasn't listening. He ranted about how I'd always been jealous, how I couldn't stand to see him happy. Then he dropped the bomb that would change everything. He said he was going to tell everyone I'd been neglecting my own children, that I left them alone at night while I went out partying, that I had men over constantly. None of it was true, but I could hear the determination in his voice. He was going to destroy my reputation to save his own. I hung up on him mid-sentence and immediately called my lawyer friend, Victoria. She'd helped with my divorce years ago and knew my situation well. When I explained what Tyler was threatening, she advised me to document everything, save every text, record every interaction if legal in our state, and most importantly, get ahead of the narrative. That afternoon, I picked my kids up from school and sat them down for a difficult conversation. I explained, in age-appropriate terms, that Uncle Tyler was going through some problems and might say things about our family that weren't true. My teenager rolled her eyes and said she already knew Uncle Tyler was a mess. My younger one just asked if Tyler's kids were okay. Their reactions broke my heart but also strengthened my resolve. The smear campaign started within days. First, it was subtle. My mom called, voice dripping with fake concern, asking if everything was okay at home. She'd heard I'd been struggling lately, Exactly, she said. When I pressed her on where she'd heard this, she deflected, saying Tyler was just worried about me. Then it escalated. My aunt posted on social media about the importance of some mothers focusing on their own children instead of judging others. Several cousins liked the post. The subtext was clear. Tyler had been making his rounds, painting me as an unfit mother who had the audacity to judge him. I screenshot everything. Every passive-aggressive post. Every concerned text from a relative who'd suddenly developed an interest in my parenting. Victoria said it was good evidence of harassment and defamation if we needed it later. The real blow came when my kids came home from their dad's house that weekend with questions. Apparently my ex-husband had received a call from Tyler, expressing concern about the children's welfare. My ex, thankfully, had laughed in Tyler's face and hung up, but the fact that Tyler had even tried to involve my ex in his scheme showed how desperate he was becoming. I decided it was time to play offense instead of defense. I started reaching out to family members individually, particularly the ones who'd been posting subtle digs online. I didn't defend myself or argue. Instead, I simply asked if they'd like to hear my side of the story. Most declined or gave me the cold shoulder. But my cousin Michael, who'd always been more reasonable than the rest, agreed to meet for coffee. When I laid out the facts, including Tyler's attempt to abandon his children at my house, his eyes widened. He admitted Tyler had painted a very different picture, one where I'd promised to help, and then cruelly reneged at the last minute. Michael became my first ally in the family war Tyler had started. He began pushing back when Tyler spread his lies, asking pointed questions about why Tyler couldn't care for his own children if he was so concerned about everyone else's. Meanwhile, the CPS investigation was moving forward. They'd interviewed Tyler multiple times, visited his apartment, and spoken with his children's teachers. The friend who'd called them provided a detailed statement about Tyler's abandonment. Things weren't looking good for him, and he knew it. That's when Tyler made his next move. He showed up at my workplace during my lunch break, making a scene in the parking lot. He accused me loudly of destroying his family, ensuring several of my coworkers heard every word. Security eventually escorted him off the property, but the damage was done. I had to have an uncomfortable conversation with my boss about my family situation. I was exhausted. Every day brought a new attack, a new rumor, a new family member turned against me. My kids were starting to feel the strain too. My teenager had gotten into an argument at school when a classmate mentioned hearing her uncle was trying to save her from her neglectful mother. One evening, as I was helping with homework and trying to maintain normalcy for my children, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. She wanted to meet, just the two of us, said it was important. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small diner the next day. My mother looked older somehow, stress etched into the lines of her face. She started by saying she was worried about the family falling apart. I waited for the guilt trip, the manipulation, but instead, she surprised me. She admitted she'd been getting calls from Tyler at all hours. He was becoming increasingly erratic, making wild accusations not just about me but about other family members too. He'd accused our aunt of stealing money from him years ago, claimed our uncle had sabotaged his job opportunities. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone. Tyler blamed everyone but himself for his problems, but my mother still couldn't fully let go. She asked, almost pleadingly, if I could just take the kids temporarily, just until Tyler got back on his feet. I looked her straight in the eye and asked when, in 40 years, had Tyler ever truly gotten on his feet without someone else propping him up. She didn't have an answer. The meeting ended with her saying she needed to think about everything. I didn't push. Change doesn't happen overnight, especially when it comes to facing hard truths about your children. As I drove home, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. Tyler's mask was slipping, and people were starting to see the real person underneath the charm. But I knew this was far from over. Tyler had lost his children to the system. His reputation was crumbling, and he blamed me for all of it. The war he'd started was really just beginning. The silence after my mother left the diner lasted exactly 12 hours. Then Tyler struck again, this time through a channel I hadn't anticipated. My daughter came home from school clutching a crumpled piece of paper, her face flushed with embarrassment. She thrust it at me without a word before running to her room. I smoothed out the flyer and felt my stomach drop. It was a poorly made missing children poster featuring Tyler's 3 kids, with my address listed as their last known location, and a plea for anyone with information to contact Tyler immediately. I found similar flyers taped to telephone poles throughout our neighborhood. My hands shook as I tore them down one by one, stuffing them into a garbage bag. Several neighbors watched from their windows, and I knew the damage was already done. Tyler had painted a target on my back in my own community. Victoria answered on the first ring when I called her. She listened to my frantic explanation, then calmly instructed me to photograph every flyer before disposing of them. Documentation would be crucial if Tyler continued escalating. She also suggested installing security cameras, which seemed extreme at the time but would prove prescient. The next morning brought a new horror. My son's teacher pulled me aside during drop-off, her expression grave. She explained that Tyler had called the school claiming to be conducting a family wellness check and asking probing questions about my children's attendance, behavior, and appearance. The teacher, thankfully, had found his questions suspicious and refused to provide information, but she wanted me to know about the incident. I spent my lunch break at the school's main office, filling out paperwork to restrict who could access information about my children. The secretary's sympathetic looks made me feel both grateful and humiliated. This was what Tyler had reduced me to, a mother having to protect her children from their own uncle. Michael called that evening with disturbing news. Tyler had shown up at his house unannounced, spinning an elaborate tale about how I'd been secretly planning to adopt his children for years. According to Tyler's version, I'd orchestrated the CPS involvement to steal his kids because I was jealous of his ability to have more children than me. The delusion was so complete that Michael wondered if Tyler actually believed his own lies. I began keeping a detailed journal of every incident, every lie, every attempt at manipulation. Victoria had emphasized the importance of contemporaneous documentation, and I filled notebook after notebook with dates, times, and descriptions. My kitchen table became a command center covered in screenshots, printed emails, and witnessed statements from neighbors who'd seen Tyler's erratic behavior. The security cameras I'd installed captured Tyler's next move perfectly. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, he crept onto my property and left something on my doorstep. I watched the footage the next morning, my heart pounding as I saw him place what looked like toys and children's clothing in a pile, then take photos with his phone. When I checked my doorstep, the items were gone, but I knew those photos would surface somewhere as evidence of his children's belongings at my house. Sure enough, by afternoon, several family members had received messages from Tyler with those photos, claiming I'd stolen his children's things when I'd kidnapped them. The fact that his children were in foster care, not with me, seemed to be a detail he conveniently omitted from his narrative. My parents' stance began to shift after Tyler targeted them directly. He'd convinced them to wire him money for a lawyer to fight for his kids, but they discovered he'd spent it on a weekend trip to a casino. When they confronted him, he accused them of sabotaging his legal case and threatened to cut them off from their grandchildren forever. The irony that he didn't even have custody of said grandchildren was lost on no one. Dad called me for the first time in weeks, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He admitted they'd been enabling Tyler for too long, always believing his promises to change. The conversation was stilted and awkward, but it was a start. Mom still couldn't bring herself to fully accept Tyler's true nature, but cracks were forming in her denial. Work became my only refuge from the family drama, until Tyler poisoned that well too. He created fake social media profiles and began leaving reviews for my company, claiming I was an unstable employee who brought personal drama to the workplace. My boss called me in for another meeting, this time with HR present. They were supportive but concerned about the potential impact on the company's reputation. I provided them with documentation of Tyler's harassment, and they agreed to pursue legal action against him for defamation if the fake reviews continued. The corporate lawyer sent a cease and desist letter to Tyler's last known address, though we all knew it was largely symbolic since he rarely stayed in one place long. The foster family caring for Tyler's children reached out through CPS, requesting a meeting. They were experienced caregivers but were struggling with the emotional damage Tyler had inflicted on his kids. The oldest boy had started telling other children that his aunt had stolen him from his father. The middle child wet the bed nightly and cried for hours. The youngest had stopped speaking entirely. I met with the foster parents at a neutral location, bringing photo albums and videos of happier times when the children were younger. We spent hours discussing their needs, their triggers, and their memories. The foster mother, a kind woman named Felicia, held my hand as I cried over what Tyler had done to his own children. Felicia suggested supervised visits between me and the kids, if CPS approved. She believed maintaining family connections could help their healing process. I agreed immediately, desperate to show them they were loved, despite their father's actions. The CPS worker promised to expedite the approval process. Tyler's harassment escalated when he learned about the potential visits. He started calling my workplace directly, claiming to be various officials needing to verify my employment. The receptionist, now aware of the situation, screened his calls, but his persistence was affecting the entire office's productivity. Late one night, motion sensors triggered my security cameras. I watched in real time as Tyler spray-painted words across my garage door. The paint was still wet when police arrived, responding to my call. They found Tyler 2 blocks away, paint can still in hand, ranting about conspiracy theories involving me, CPS, and what he called a family theft ring. The arrest should have been a turning point, but Tyler's manipulation had one more twist. From jail, he called our elderly grandmother, sobbing about being framed. She, in turn, called every family member she could think of, demanding they help her poor grandson. The family divide deepened, with some relatives finally seeing through Tyler's lies while others doubled down on their support. My cousin Sarah, who'd initially sided with Tyler, called me after visiting him in jail. She described a man she barely recognized, paranoid, aggressive, and completely detached from reality. He'd spent their entire visit drawing elaborate diagrams showing how I'd orchestrated a years-long plan to steal his life. The delusion was so complete that Sarah left shaken, finally understanding what I'd been dealing with. Victoria recommended filing for a restraining order, which I'd resisted until now. The vandalism, combined with the documented harassment, made for a strong case. I spent hours in the courthouse, filling out forms and providing evidence. The temporary order was granted immediately, with a full hearing scheduled for the following month. Tyler's release on bail came with conditions: no contact with me or my children, and mandatory check-ins with a bail officer. He violated the no-contact order within hours, sending messages through flying monkeys in the family. Each violation was documented and reported, building a paper trail that would prove crucial later. My first supervised visit with Tyler's children was heartbreaking. The oldest boy refused to look at me, the middle child clung to the foster mother, and the youngest sat silent in the corner. I didn't push, simply sitting on the floor with some of their favorite books, reading aloud to anyone who wanted to listen. Slowly, the youngest crept closer, eventually climbing into my lap. Progress, however small, was still progress. The foster parents reported that the children's behavior improved slightly after our visit. They'd stopped insisting I'd stolen them and had begun asking questions about their father's whereabouts. The truth, delivered in age-appropriate pieces, seemed to provide more comfort than Tyler's elaborate lies ever had. My own children struggled with the ongoing drama, my teenager's grades slipped, and my younger child had started having nightmares. I arranged for family counseling, adding another expense to my already strained budget. The therapist specialized in family trauma and provided tools for helping children process adult conflicts they shouldn't have to witness. Tyler's next scheme involved contacting my ex-husband's new wife, spinning tales about my mental instability, and suggesting they should seek full custody of my children. My ex-husband shut it down immediately, threatening his own legal action if Tyler continued harassing his family. It was oddly comforting to have my ex-husband firmly in my corner, united in protecting our children from Tyler's chaos. The family grapevine brought news that Tyler had been fired from his latest job after showing up intoxicated and ranting about family conspiracies. He'd been staying with various friends, wearing out his welcome within days at each location. His spiral was accelerating, and everyone could see it except him. Mom finally broke her silence, calling me late one night in tears. She'd been going through old photos and realized how many family events Tyler had ruined over the years. Birthday parties ended in drama, holidays destroyed by his antics, relationships severed by his lies. The pattern was undeniable when viewed in sequence, and her guilt over enabling him for so long was overwhelming. I didn't offer comfort or absolution. She needed to sit with these feelings, to truly understand the damage her favoritism had caused. But I did tell her it wasn't too late to change, to stop enabling Tyler and start protecting his children instead. She promised to think about it, which was more than I'd expected. The restraining order hearing approached with mounting tension. Tyler had hired a lawyer using money borrowed from our grandmother, while I relied on Victoria's expertise and my mountain of documentation. The night before the hearing, Tyler sent a message through our aunt, offering to drop everything if I'd just take his kids and give him monthly payments to support himself while getting back on his feet. I screenshot the message and added it to my evidence file. His offer proved he'd never wanted his children back. He'd only wanted to control me, to force me into the role of caretaker while he continued his destructive lifestyle. The clarity was both vindicating and heartbreaking. My children's school implemented additional security measures after Tyler was spotted across the street during dismissal. He hadn't approached or violated the restraining order's distance requirements, but his presence was enough to concern administrators. My daughter's friends started asking why there was a creepy man watching their school, adding another layer of humiliation to our situation. Michael organized a family meeting, attempting to bridge the divide Tyler had created. Half the invitees refused to attend, still convinced I was the villain in Tyler's fabricated narrative. Those who came listened as Michael presented a timeline of Tyler's lies, cross-referenced with documentation I'd provided. Watching relatives' faces change as they realized they'd been manipulated was both satisfying and sad. Tyler's children continued their weekly visits with me, gradually warming up as memories of better times resurfaced. The oldest started asking difficult questions about why his father had left them with strangers. I answered honestly but gently, emphasizing that adult problems weren't his fault or responsibility. The foster parents reported improvements in all three children's behavior and emotional regulation. My workplace installed additional security measures after Tyler was caught on camera attempting to enter the building with a fake delivery uniform. The security guard recognized him from photos I'd provided and called police immediately. Tyler fled before they arrived, but the incident added another violation to his growing record. Victoria prepared me extensively for the restraining order hearing, reviewing potential questions and organizing evidence into a coherent narrative. She warned that Tyler might attempt to represent himself if his borrowed money ran out, which could make the proceedings unpredictable. I practiced staying calm and factual, resisting the urge to respond to emotional manipulation. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I reviewed my documentation one final time, each incident a reminder of how far Tyler had pushed things. What started as a request to raise his children had evolved into a campaign of harassment that had touched every aspect of my life. Tomorrow would determine whether the legal system would protect my family or enable Tyler's continued escalation. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. She and Dad would be attending the hearing, not to support Tyler, but to bear witness to the truth. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. The family was slowly realigning, choosing reality over comfortable lies. As dawn broke on the hearing day, I prepared myself for whatever Tyler might attempt. Victoria had warned he might make dramatic accusations or try to paint himself as the victim one more time, but I had truth on my side, documented and verified, along with a growing support system of family members who'd finally seen through his manipulations. The war Tyler had started was reaching its crescendo, and I was ready to finish it. The courthouse hallway buzzed with nervous energy as I arrived early, Victoria at my side carrying 2 briefcases full of documentation. Tyler stood near the water fountain with his borrowed lawyer, a young man who looked fresh out of law school, and kept shuffling through papers with trembling hands. My parents sat on a bench halfway between us, Mom clutching Dad's arm like a lifeline. Tyler's appearance shocked me. His usual polished charm had vanished, replaced by bloodshot eyes, wrinkled clothes, and hands that wouldn't stop moving. He paced in small circles, muttering to his lawyer who nodded along with obvious discomfort. When our eyes met across the hallway, Tyler's face contorted with rage before his lawyer grabbed his arm and whispered urgently. The bailiff called our case number and we filed into the small courtroom. Victoria had prepared me for this moment, but my heart still hammered as I took my seat. Tyler's lawyer immediately requested a continuance, claiming they needed more time to prepare. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steel gray hair, denied the motion and instructed us to proceed. Victoria presented our evidence methodically. The security footage of Tyler vandalizing my property played on a small monitor, his face clearly visible in the streetlight. She submitted the fake flyers, the screenshots of his harassment campaign, and witness statements from my neighbors, co-workers, and family members. Each piece built upon the last, creating an undeniable pattern of escalating harassment. Tyler's lawyer attempted to paint me as the aggressor, suggesting I'd orchestrated everything to steal Tyler's children. The argument fell apart when Victoria presented Tyler's own text messages, including his offer to abandon his parental rights in exchange for monthly payments. The judge's expression hardened as she reviewed the evidence. When Tyler took the stand, his carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. He rambled about conspiracies, claimed I'd been planning this for years, and accused multiple family members of betraying him. His lawyer tried desperately to redirect him to relevant questions, but Tyler kept veering into paranoid territory. At one point, he stood up and pointed at me, shouting about how I'd turned everyone against him. The judge ordered him to sit down and threatened contempt charges if he had another outburst. The testimony from the CPS caseworker proved devastating to Tyler's case. case. She detailed his children's condition when they'd been found abandoned, the trauma they'd experienced, and Tyler's complete lack of cooperation with reunification efforts. She confirmed that I'd been approved for supervised visits and that the children's behavior had improved significantly since those visits began. Tyler's lawyer made one last attempt to salvage the situation by calling character witnesses. He'd managed to find 2 distant relatives who still believed Tyler's version of events. Their testimony quickly unraveled when Victoria cross-examined them, revealing they hadn't actually witnessed any of the incidents they were testifying about and were simply repeating what Tyler had told them. The judge didn't deliberate long. She granted the permanent restraining order, extending it to include my children, my workplace, and my children's schools. She also ordered Tyler to cease all indirect contact through third parties and warned that any violations would result in immediate arrest. The order would remain in effect for 5 years, with the possibility of extension if necessary. Tyler exploded at the verdict. He shouted that the system was rigged, that I'd bought off the judge, that this was all part of my master plan. The bailiffs moved toward him as his lawyer desperately tried to calm him down. My parents watched in horror as their golden child revealed exactly who he'd always been beneath the charm. As the bailiffs escorted Tyler out, still ranting about injustice and conspiracy, his lawyer approached Victoria with a proposal. Tyler would agree to voluntarily terminate his parental rights if I would agree not to pursue criminal charges for the harassment. Victoria and I stepped outside to discuss it privately. The decision tore at me. Those children deserved better than Tyler, but they also deserved to know their father hadn't simply abandoned them. Victoria reminded me that the criminal charges were separate from the restraining order, and that the district attorney would ultimately decide whether to prosecute regardless of my wishes. We returned to the courtroom and declined the offer. Outside the courthouse, my parents waited by my car. Mom had been crying, her makeup streaked and hands shaking. Dad stood beside her, looking older than I'd ever seen him. They approached cautiously, as if afraid I might reject them. Mom reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. She whispered an apology, not just for the recent events, but for years of enabling Tyler at my expense. Dad nodded along, adding his own quiet acknowledgement of their failures. I didn't offer forgiveness. That would take time. But I didn't pull away either. Michael had been waiting in the parking lot with Sarah and several other cousins who'd come to support me. They formed a protective circle as we walked to our cars, discussing the outcome and what it meant for the family going forward. The divide Tyler had created was healing, slowly but surely. That evening, Felicia called with good news. The judge overseeing Tyler's custody case had reviewed the restraining order and CPS reports. She was moving forward with termination proceedings, citing abandonment and failure to provide a safe environment. The children would remain in foster care while the court explored permanent placement options, including the possibility of adoption. I submitted my application to adopt Tyler's children the next morning. Victoria helped me navigate the complex paperwork, warning that the process could take months or even years. Background checks, home studies, financial reviews, all necessary steps to ensure the children's safety and well-being. I prepared myself for a long journey. My own children's reactions surprised me. My teenager, who'd been so affected by the drama, volunteered to help prepare the house for their cousins. She researched trauma-informed parenting and shared articles about helping children adjust to new homes. My younger child drew pictures for each cousin, carefully labeling them with their names and hanging them in what would be their rooms. Work gradually returned to normal as Tyler's harassment ceased. My boss commended me for handling the situation professionally and assured me my job was secure. Co-workers who'd witnessed Tyler's parking lot meltdown offered quiet support, sharing their own stories of difficult family members. The supervised visits with Tyler's children evolved into unsupervised afternoons at my house. The oldest boy, initially so angry and confused, began opening up about his fears. He worried about being separated from his siblings, about having to change schools again, about whether anyone would want to adopt all 3 of them together. I assured him repeatedly that they would stay together, no matter what. Felicia arranged for the children to have input in their placement decisions, recognizing that the oldest was mature enough to express preferences. During one visit, he asked directly if I would adopt them. When I confirmed that I was trying to, he nodded solemnly and asked if they could still call me Auntie instead of Mom. I agreed immediately, understanding that titles mattered less than stability and love. The home study process proved exhausting but necessary. Social workers examined every aspect of my life, from financial records to personal references. They interviewed my children, my neighbors, my employer. Each step brought more paperwork, more questions, more scrutiny. Victoria guided me through each phase, ensuring nothing was overlooked. Tyler's termination hearing proceeded without him. He'd failed to appear despite multiple notices. His lawyer withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences. The judge reviewed the evidence of abandonment, the CPS reports, and the restraining order before making her decision. Tyler's parental rights were terminated, freeing his children for adoption. My parents stepped up in unexpected ways during this time. They established college funds for all 5 grandchildren, acknowledging that they'd given Tyler multiple chances they'd never offered me. They attended family therapy sessions, working to understand how their favoritism had contributed to the current situation. Progress was slow, but genuine. The adoption finalization date arrived 6 months after I'd first applied. My children decorated the courtroom hallway with handmade signs welcoming their cousins officially into our family. Felicia attended as a witness, tears streaming down her face as she watched the children she'd cared for find their permanent home. The judge made each child feel special during the proceedings, asking them about their favorite subjects in school and what they liked about living with me. The youngest, who'd been silent for so long, proudly announced that he'd learned to ride a bike in my driveway. The middle child showed off a report card with improving grades. The oldest simply said he felt safe. When the judge signed the final decree, my teenager started a round of applause that filled the courtroom. We took photos with the judge, everyone smiling despite the complex emotions of the day. Tyler's children were now legally mine, but more importantly, they were safe, loved, and beginning to heal. That night, as I tucked in my newest family members, the youngest grabbed my hand and whispered a thank you. Not for adopting them, but for reading stories during those first supervised visits when he'd been too scared to speak. The middle child asked if we could keep the same bedtime routine Felicia had established. The oldest lingered in the doorway, finally expressing what he'd held back for months. Anger at his father, but also relief that the uncertainty was over. My house felt fuller, but also more complete. 5 children meant chaos, certainly. More laundry, more homework help, more sibling squabbles. But it also meant more laughter, more hugs, more moments of joy amid the healing process. We established new traditions while honoring what the children had lost. Tyler disappeared entirely after losing his parental rights. Rumors circulated through the family grapevine. He'd moved several states away, was living with a new girlfriend, had told people he never had children. I documented each rumor in case he ever resurfaced, but mostly I focused on moving forward. The restraining order remained active, a legal shield protecting our growing family. I installed additional security measures and maintained vigilance, but Tyler seemed to have finally accepted defeat. His absence felt like both a relief and a lingering threat, never knowing if or when he might reappear. My relationship with my parents continued evolving. They attended every school event, every birthday party, every family gathering, slowly earning trust through consistent actions rather than words. Mom learned to treat all 5 grandchildren equally, while Dad became the gentle grandfather figure Tyler's children had never known. As the first anniversary of the adoption approached, I reflected on how dramatically life had changed. What began as Tyler's attempt to abandon his children had transformed into something beautiful, a family forged through adversity, bound by choice rather than just blood. The children still carried scars from their past, but they were healing, thriving, and most importantly, they were home.